WRCA.
Ocala.
Thank you. 22 minutes before 10 o'clock, and tomorrow is Valentine's Day, and it's a day of love. And right now we have a love story to tell you about, but it's not the romantic kind of a love story that you normally associate with Valentine's Day. It's the love of daughters and a mother, and such a sweet book. And gosh, we're going to speak to the author. Her name is Donna Solecka Urbikas. I might be saying her name wrong. I'll find out in just a second. The book is called My Sister's Mother. It's a memoir of war, exile, and Stalin's Siberia. And if I could just read to you the information that was sent to me as a way to introduce you to it and to Donna. It says here that Donna's half-sister, Mira, was 5 years old when she and her mother, Janina, were taken from their small family farm in eastern Poland and shipped to a hard labor camp in Siberia amid the turmoil of World War II. The shared experience, it says here, of war and exile created a bond, as you might expect, between the mother and the daughter, an exceptionally close relationship that Donna, who we'll speak to in just a moment, who was born years after the war, by the way, she was raised here in America, in the Midwest. She would struggle to achieve that same bond. And oh my gosh, this story will really get you. I want to, if you're watching the streaming video, I'll put a picture up of the cover of the book in just a minute. Let me say hello first. Donna, good morning. What an amazing story you're telling here. Good morning, Donna.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Are you? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Chicago.
So this story has been bubbling inside of you. Maybe that's not the right word, but it's been within you for so many years. Was it always a desire to put this out as a book?
Yes, it was actually, but it was more about the World War II story because people were not very knowledgeable about what happened to Poland during World War II. Most people think that it was only Germany that attacked, but it was also Russia from the other side, and that's where my mother and sister were.
And so, without giving anything away from the book, it's not a novel, but at the same time, we don't want to give away too much. But were you aware of the different relationship that your mother had with your sister at a young age, or was it something that occurred to you in later years?
No, I was aware of it very early on because my mother never really stopped talking about World War II. She never left Siberia, in a sense, mentally. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in America, as you mentioned. I was born in England. By the way, it is kind of a love story, too, because my sister and I have different fathers, and my mother met my father in that whole turmoil in Russia and Siberia.
Is that right?
And then they, of course, war separated them because my father was in the army and in the Polish army, and my mother and sister ended up in India eventually for the duration of the war. And then after the war, they both, decided to go to England, and that's where they met again. So it's kind of a love story.
Wow. Okay. So do you have a good relationship with your sister?
Yes, I do. She's 15 years older than I am, so obviously we had a very different relationship with our mother because of the differences in not only our age, but also our experiences. Her experience as a 5-year-old getting deported with my mother, to Siberia, and me growing up in America, because I was only 2 when we came here from England. So.
What a difference. So do you share notes with each other? In other words, I guess I'm trying to find out if you know how sometimes they'll say a soldier who has lost comrades in war has like survivor's guilt. Did you have good life guilt in a way?
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean, they would sit there, my mother especially, my sister wasn't so much about talking about all that stuff, but my mother, which is very unusual because most people don't want to talk about those things, but in my mother's case, it was just the opposite. World War II was literally in our faces all the time, and, and I began to see this relationship that they had, this very close relationship, and, I was beginning at one point, I remember, after maybe I was in my teens at that point, feeling, gee, gee, I wish I had gone through something like that so I could have this, close relationship with my mother. And I was feeling a bit guilty. I think I do write about that in the book.
Yeah. I think it's very, honest of you to not only recognize it for your own sake, but then to share it with the rest of us. And one of the things I think happens when we read that is we recognize it in ourselves. Maybe not to the same extent that you have gone through it, but we all have maybe lived a better life than somebody else we know. And it's kind of weird that we kind of wish that could have been us. But did your sister wish she could have been you?
I don't think she's ever really, verbalized that. I think she felt that, I used to hear a lot of, gee, you're so spoiled kind of thing, even though, we weren't very wealthy when we were growing up. I mean, when I was growing up, we were immigrants, and my father was almost 50, so it was hard for him to switch over into his career. He was educated, but he never managed to get a job in that. And so, even though we didn't have very much, my sister, and my mother would often say to me, gee, you're so spoiled because you've got all this stuff. And, to me, I wasn't, comparing myself to my American friends, I wasn't, spoiled.
Right. The title is intriguing. Just calling it My Sister's Mother. I mean, one thinks right away, looking at the title, that there was a different relationship between you and your mother and your sister and your mother. Do your fathers play any role in any of that at all?
Well, her father passed away shortly after the war, and my father, kind of took over being her father as well. So, and he did really save my mother and sister in that whole turmoil, during the war. So, he wasn't quite as stuck on talking about all that bad stuff. He was a little bit more positive, and thank God for that, because I had a, positive role model. There were only the four of us in America. So, he was pretty, significant in my life in terms of being able to kind of get through this turmoil that my mother seemed to always have.
But in your book, you painted the picture of your mother as a patriot of Poland, even when she had the chance to leave Poland unharmed, she refused.
You were talking about going back to Poland after the war?
Yeah, because when she and Mira was hiding out, and then she was recounting one story of a German official, and because she had a German surname, that she would be able to do the transportation out.
Yeah, that was before the Germans attacked. Yeah, right. They were, gathering up, giving up people an opportunity. But she was extremely patriotic. Her husband, my sister's father, was half Austrian, and he really was very patriotic to Poland. His mother, was one that instilled that in him, and he fought in a very defining battle also with Józef Piłsudski during World War I, and that was kind of one of the reasons my mother was deported, because she was the wife of this army soldier and who had fought the Russians, during the World War I, and also she was a landowner, and so the Soviets were looking for any excuse to gather up people who, they could take advantage of as essentially free slave labor.
Wow. What kind of labor were they forced to do?
My mother was sentenced to 10 years of hard labor in the forest to, cut down trees and chop off big branches, these felled trees. And,
wow.
It was a pretty long day, and my sister at the same time was left in the camp by herself. Her father, at that point, was imprisoned, so he wasn't there to help them.
When you say sentenced, was there an actual trial, or they just said you're going to spend 10 years in the forest?
Right. They basically, came. In fact, the anniversary of my mother's and sister's deportation was Friday. February 10th was the night, the first major deportation from eastern Poland, and they were in that whole. It was very, very cold, and they basically, pounded down their door with rifles. The Soviets did, and pointed the gun at them and said, "Gather up your things," get on the wagon.
That part of the story needs to be told so many times, because how many times do we take our freedom for granted? We don't realize that could happen to any of us if we let our guard down. I'm not trying to be political. I'm just saying that we need to learn the lessons from the past. I'm just curious about something in yourself. Maybe it's more of a psychological question. Did writing this release something from you, almost like in a therapeutic way?
Oh yeah, it definitely did, and I think it did for my mother as well. I mean, I got
really?
I think I got the World War II part of the story done while she was still alive, and it was only years later that I started this book when my first child was born over 30 years ago, but I didn't write it consistently throughout the whole 30 years. But when I revisited again, I was I was in a writing program at the University of Chicago, and they pretty much convinced me that I need to make it more of my memoir, which I think has been helpful for me to kind of get through some of the things that really bothered me when I was growing up and as a teenager. But when I got the World War II story part done, my mother did finally stop talking about all that stuff. It was kind of interesting.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that does say a lot, doesn't it? That almost says that it was a big release for her too. It is so interesting to hear the stories from that era. There's a strange. What's the word when two things come together that don't normally come together? But there's a
Coincidence?
That's a good enough. When you have something as horrible as war combined with something that sounds romantic, it's weird, isn't it? That happens a lot with World War II stories.
I think it's because, people know that, tomorrow I may not be alive, and so you take advantage of the situation,
Yeah.
And what a heart-wrenching part of the story when Janina and Mira returned to the farm, and it was sort of like disheveled and stuff from all of the soldiers, but Janina took the precaution to bury some clothes, so then that way they would be able to have something warm to wear as they planned their escape.
Wow.
Yeah. She was very resourceful, and it was a good thing she did that because her farmhouse was ransacked, and very little was left, and that also played into how she managed later on in Siberia and then Russia, because a lot of the ways that people survived was to barter their clothes, especially like undergarments that were very much in demand by the villagers that were nearby these the labor camps, or on the way to them or away from them. That was a huge commodity to have, and she didn't have much of that.
Oh my gosh, I'm looking at the pictures in the book now. Wow, look at that pretty dress she's wearing, and when she was in 1946. Do you know, I have a question. This is going to make, and I'm pretty naive about everything, but I have a question that's going to make me sound even more naive. Your picture, you're so beautiful, by the way, and the picture in the back of the book of you now, it's in color. You've got beautiful blonde hair, beautiful blue eyes. I always thought that the blue-eyed, blonde-haired people were spared. What was the story there? Did they just take everybody in Poland and put them into labor camps?
Well, my mother, she was a blonde, and I don't remember if she had kind of hazel-colored eyes. But no, I mean, you're thinking more in terms of what the Germans did.
This was the Russians. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the Russians didn't really care. All they cared about was whether you had a sturdy body and if you could, swing an axe like my mother had to, and get through it all. So they were pretty, devoid of all of that.
Did your mother share with you, and forgive me if I'm crossing the line, but did your mother share with you, was she exposed to sexual abuse at all?
She was very modest, and that's not something she really talked much about,
right.
Although she did mention, witnessing, some sexual activity in the camps and stuff like that. But, she was very, quiet about that sort of thing. I don't think anything really bad happened to her. All I remember as a teenager how she cautioned me and repeatedly to be careful, where I'm walking and to look around. I mean, growing up in Chicago, you sort of have this third eye in the back of your head, and that kind of thing. But she never was specific about anything happening to her.
Wow.
So it's hard for me to say.
The book is beautifully written. Is writing something? You said you took 30 years to write the book. Are you writing regularly, or is this an exception for you? You're a teacher, right?
Well, I was at one point. I was a science teacher, so my background is more of science and engineering. So, but I've always wanted to be a writer, and I have taken over the years many writing workshops and classes and such, and attended many writing conferences and things like that. But I was in that 2-year program at the University of Chicago, the writing certificate program that they had going, and that was really very helpful. I kind of worked on the book during that period of time in the creative nonfiction section of that program, and I do want to continue writing. I enjoy it very much. Right now I'm actually doing something completely different in real estate, but it's been, I guess, a professional career changer is what I am.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And the people that Janina came across when she was working with the trees and everything, and then she was talking to the Russian, the older Russian woman, and she was trying to tell her that there would be no more czars and that we would have freedom.
Right, yeah. Well, the Russian people, my mother always said it wasn't the Russian people that were the ones that, were bad to her. It was the Soviets, the communists. And, this woman, they had a much better life before this whole idea of collectivization happened, and, trying to manage things from the top, and supposedly everybody's equal, but of course some were more equal than others, and control, that whole system just really wasn't working out, and this woman was very clear about, how things were and where her life was, and she wasn't afraid to speak out, and there were, other people there as well, and that helped my mother.
The map in the beginning of the book really illustrates that they were really moved around a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, they went all the way to Bombay, it looks like, as far east as Bombay.
Yeah. Well, what happened, just a kind of quick history briefing here, when Germany and Russia attacked Poland, Germany and Russia were in cahoots together. They had a secret protocol to a pact they had signed in 1939, and this secret protocol was about divvying up Poland between the two of them. And then Germany in 1941 decides, in fact, to attack Russia. So when that happened, Russia all of a sudden becomes an ally of, Britain and France, and at that point America wasn't in there just yet. But anyway, one of the stipulations was that, because by then the Polish government, the real Polish government, was exiled in London, and the agreement was that they would let go of all these people they had deported, that the Soviets had deported, and my father was an army officer, and he had been captured and he was imprisoned, and he was supposed to be let go. So, there's this huge turmoil of all these people trying to get away from the camps, and, the Polish army's forming under British, command at that point, and supplies. And so all these civilians, like my mother and sister, were trying to reach the Polish army, and that's where my parents met originally in a city near Saratov. And so they, from there they had to go and try to find a place to get out of there. And so there were these, the thousands of people that actually survived those camps after almost 2 years, were shuffled across the southern part of the Soviet Union, almost all the way to China, and back, looking for like a collective farm or village or somewhere where they could, hold up and get some shelter and food and such. That was actually even harder than the labor camp itself. But eventually, my mother made it to Tehran, and there she was there with Mira for about a year, where she studied Red Cross. She became a Red Cross nurse, and then from there, while India was still under in the British Empire, there was a settlement camp near Bombay, or today Mumbai, that housed all these Polish orphan children, and my mother became a nurse at one of the hospitals there that, took care of these orphan children, and then my sister was going to school, and they kind of waited out the war in India.
And there were some moments where Janina had to leave Mira with friends while she was off doing what she was doing at different portions of her life, and that had to be harrowing for her because she didn't know if Mira would be there when she went back for her.
Right. These were times that I think must have just, tore her heart out because she had really no choice but to leave Mira. And sometimes there was a reliable friend that she could leave her with, and sometimes Mira had to be left alone. And and those were very scary times for Mira. So she's had a lot of very scary moments in her life.
The book is called My Sister's Mother. What a you're just holding us all spellbound, Donna. And by the way, your real name is Danuta, is that right?
Well, yes, my Polish name is Danuta
Okay.
Solecka, and in Polish the women take on the, if it's an CKI or SKI ending for a man, it becomes an CKA or SKA
Okay.
for, really complicated. But anyway, that's my Polish name. Yeah.
Donna, we're out of time. Let me give away the book. I have a copy of My Sister's Mother. Call me if you want, that was sent to me. What a beautiful story. Donna, it's heartfelt. That's the best word here. It's a heartfelt story. The rest of us have to go by it. Real quickly, Donna, we've got like 20 seconds. What's a good website?
Well, you can go to, I'm not selling it off of mine, but there's lots of information on mine. It's danutaurbikas.com, or you can go to Barnes & Noble. You can go to the University of Wisconsin Press, who published the book. You can go to Amazon. I would prefer people try to do their local independent bookstores.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got to go. This is WOCA Ocala. Thank you so much, Donna. We'll be right back.
Fox News Radio, I'm Pat O'Neill. Trade will be one topic when President Trump meets with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau this morning.
The president has signaled his intention to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement, saying that NAFTA is a bad trade deal for America.